The wind came hard off the ridge that morning, tearing through the cottonwoods like a restless spirit. Dust chased itself across the open yard in little twisting whirlpools, sweeping around the sagging barn and up the porch steps, where Eleanor Ward stood with her coffee, eyes narrowed against the glare. Her fingers, brown from sun and stained by the years, curled steady around the tin mug. She sipped slow, gaze fixed on the horizon beyond the fence line, where the world turned gold and red against a pale blue sky. Out here on the edge of Red Hollow Canyon, time moved different. The land was all bone and silence, stretched flat and cracked under God's unforgiving sun. Canyon walls rose like teeth in the distance, jagged and beautiful, lit blood orange at dawn and carved deep by centuries of wind and water. Coyotes called at night. Sometimes mountain lions screamed like dying women down by the dry riverbed. And always the wind, howling, whispering, never still. Ellie had lived alone on this patch of land going on 8 years. Folks in town said it was madness, a woman keeping a ranch by herself that far out, especially one who barely spoke above a whisper and wore a revolver like a second belt. But no one came to question her. They kept their distance, and she let them. She rode into town once a month for flour, coffee, and mail if there was any. She never stayed long. They called her Widow Ward, like it was a title, not a name. Once, she hadn't been so silent. Once, laughter had echoed off the canyon walls and filled this land like spring rain. Her husband, Jonah, had been a Union scout in the war, a tall, quiet man with kind eyes and a sharp aim. He taught her to shoot beneath the sycamores, standing behind her with calloused hands on her hips, correcting her stance with a patient touch. She wasn't a natural at first, but she practiced every day, determined, stubborn as a mule. When she finally hit the knot in the post clean through, he kissed her cheek and said, "Ain't a man alive gonna take what's yours, El." Jonah died 6 winters back. Bandits out of Texas, 3 of them, looking for horses. They'd thought the place empty. They'd thought wrong. She buried Jonah with his rifle across his chest and a silver dollar over each eye. Never said a word to the sheriff. Never asked for justice. After that, she cut the world off like a frayed rope, built her fences higher, locked the barn doors even in daylight. She didn't cry. Not once. She'd started wearing his hat, though, and his boots, a size too big, worn soft at the heels. Sometimes, in the dusk, if you squinted just right, she looked like him, tall, silent, dangerous. They whispered in town that she wasn't right in the head, said grief had twisted her, that she spoke to shadows and slept with her rifle beside her bed. The preacher's wife once swore she saw Ellie pacing the churchyard at midnight, barefoot and praying in tongues. But Ellie didn't mind the talk. Let them spin their stories. Let them keep their distance. Every morning she walked the fence line, checking posts and wire. Every evening she oiled her guns and lit a lamp in the front window. Some nights, she climbed the bluff behind the house, where you could see clear to where the horizon burned into Utah, and she'd sit with her back to the stone and her rifle across her knees, watching for something she couldn't name. That day started like any other. The sun rose sharp and mean, casting long shadows across the parched yard. She fed the chickens, rubbed salve into her mare's cracked hooves, and patched the roof of the smokehouse, where a storm had ripped off a shingle 2 nights before. But just after noon, as the wind stilled and the air turned thick with silence, she saw the dust. Not the kind kicked up by weather or cattle. This was darker, lower, controlled. Riders. She stood still, hand shielding her eyes, and watched the line of dust move west to east across the horizon, just beyond the canyon edge. Too far to see their faces, but close enough to count the number, 7, maybe 8. She didn't panic, didn't move, just turned and walked inside, set her mug on the windowsill, and pulled the heavy curtains closed. In the back of the house, beneath the floorboards of the old pantry, was a trunk. She dragged it out with both hands, cursing the weight. Inside, 1 Sharp's rifle, 2 Colts, ammunition, and a small, leather-bound ledger filled with hand-drawn maps and notes in Jonah's handwriting. She took the rifle first, checking the sight, brushing dust from the barrel like a mother smoothing her child's hair. Loaded it slow, steady. She moved through the house with purpose, locked the doors, barred the windows, threw open the trapdoor under the rug in the parlor, and lit the lantern in the root cellar, pulled down the storm shutters, oiled the hinges of the shotgun slung above the hearth, and placed a claymore in the dry creek bed below the back fence, just in case. By the time the riders reached the edge of Red Hollow, she was ready. But they didn't come that night. She waited, rifle across her lap, eyes never blinking. Hours passed. The moon rose and the coyotes sang, but the land stayed quiet. The next morning, there were boot prints by the edge of her property. Cattle spooked and bolted. A rabbit torn to pieces near the barn door. They were watching. That afternoon, a boy from town, young Levi from the feed store, barely 16 and too skinny for his boots, rode up wild-eyed and panting. "You heard?" he asked, breathless, wiping sweat from his brow. "It's the Blaine gang. They're coming this way." She said nothing, just held out a glass of water. Levi drank fast, then looked over his shoulder like someone might be trailing him. "Sheriff says they hit 2 ranches outside Drywell. Shot a man in the back. Took his wife. Nobody knows where they are now." Ellie watched the boy shake. His hands were trembling. His fear was real. "They say Duke Blaine's with them," he whispered, almost like it hurt to speak the name. "Biggest bastard west of Abilene. Said he's headed this way." She nodded once, took the glass back, and turned toward the barn. "Tell your mother to keep the doors locked," she said, voice low and dry as gravel, "and stay out of sight after dark." Levi hesitated. "You ain't thinking of fighting him, are you?" She looked back over her shoulder, eyes like cold iron. "I'm not thinking," she said. "I'm remembering." The boy didn't ask what that meant. He just nodded and rode off, kicking dust behind him like a warning. Ellie stood still as the wind picked up again, whipping her coat around her knees and lifting the brim of her husband's hat. Far off in the canyon, a hawk screamed. The dust cloud on the horizon was closer now. They were coming. The sun dipped low behind the canyon's jagged rim, spilling rust-colored light across the plains like the sky itself was bleeding. Ellie stood on the porch, still as stone, her gaze fixed westward. The horizon trembled with motion, fine dust rising in jagged plumes. Too narrow for cattle, too far off for wagons. She didn't need a spyglass to know what it was. Riders. She turned on her heel without a word, the boards creaking under her boots, and stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind her. The lock slid into place with the finality of a coffin lid. She bolted it top and bottom, then moved through the dim house like a ghost retracing familiar haunts. Curtains were drawn tight. Lamps doused. Shadows deepened. She reached beneath the wooden shelf in the kitchen, pulled a loose slat free, and reached into the narrow cavity. Her hand came back with a key, rusted, small, deadly in purpose. In the parlor, she knelt beside the hearth, lifted a corner of the worn rug, and unlocked the trapdoor hidden beneath. From the hollow beneath the floor, she dragged out a pine crate scuffed, dust-choked, sealed with a war-era cavalry brand scorched into the lid. She opened it with care. Inside lay tools of death long asleep, but perfectly preserved. A Sharps rifle with oiled walnut stock and custom sight, 2 Colt Navy revolvers, and boxes of ammunition wrapped in wax paper and tied with twine. She ran her hand across the Sharps, then lifted it reverently. Jonah's initials were etched faintly into the butt plate. Her fingers trembled, but only for a breath. She checked the rifle, loaded 4 rounds, and clicked the action shut with a soft metallic finality. Next came the porch. She stepped back into the fading light, with a coil of wire and a handful of iron nails. She worked quickly, laying a snare across the left corner post, where the gang would likely see cover. Beneath the stairs, she wedged a glass bottle full of kerosene and match heads into a notch she'd carved years ago. Near the barn door, she placed a sharpened rake beneath a scatter of straw, tines turned upward. None of it would stop a determined man, but it would slow him. It was a dance she had choreographed in her head 100 times. By the time the last trap was set, night had fallen. The desert cooled fast, and a sickle moon cast silver knives across the yard. Ellie climbed the creaking stairs to the loft and lay flat on her stomach beneath the small window, facing west. She aimed the rifle through the cracked pane and breathed slow, counting the seconds between heartbeats. The breeze tickled her cheek, carrying with it the distant sound of hooves. She didn't blink. The sound grew louder, first a murmur, then a rhythm. Then it stopped. Silence. A memory rose from the black corners of her mind, unbidden and sharp. They'd been riding back from Widow Carson's spring dance, Jonah and her. He'd tied her lace shawl to his saddle horn and was humming some battlefield hymn under his breath. The moon was bright that night, too, mocking bright. They were halfway down the southern pass when the shot rang out. Jonah's horse screamed and collapsed. Ellie had tumbled from the saddle, rolled hard, and scrambled behind a fallen log. 3 men emerged from the brush, drunk, laughing. One of them carried a saber with a broken tip. Another wore a stolen cavalry coat. The leader, slick-haired and rat-eyed, said they wanted the horse. And the woman, too. Jonah was already bleeding, shot through the side. Still, he stood up behind that log and fired once, killing one of them. The rat-eyed one returned fire. Ellie didn't remember hearing Jonah fall, only the silence after. She'd picked up Jonah's revolver, her ears ringing, eyes wet with dust and fury. The leader called her a bitch, said he'd gut her slow. She shot him through the throat before he could finish the sentence. By the time the sheriff arrived, she dragged Jonah's body home on a feed cart. The memory shattered as a soft clink echoed in the darkness below the window. Metal on stone. A whisper of movement. Then another. There were shadows against the barn. Men crouched, watching. 7 of them at least. One leaned on his saddle horn, scanning the house through a spyglass. Down by the cottonwoods, a voice drawled low. "She's holed up like a prairie rat," said a man with a thick southern rasp. "Ain't nothing but a spook in a dress. I say we light the damn place up." Another chuckled. "Heard she took a shot at a man in town once just for spitting too close to her fence." "Rumors," said the first. "Old widow probably pisses herself when we knock." A third voice, a quiet, calculating one, cut through the others. "Still, best not to take chances. The Blaine way is fast and clean." The men fanned out, slipping through the mesquite like wolves. Ellie stayed frozen, eyes fixed, finger resting light on the trigger guard. Her heart thudded slow and deep, but her breath was measured calm. Years of silence and grief had dulled the world's edges, but not her aim. Movement near the porch, one of them creeping along the wall, pistol drawn. His shadow stretched long across the dry boards. Another figure dashed across the yard, low and fast. Ellie didn't fire. Not yet. She watched, waited. One of them stopped just beneath the window. She could hear his breath. He was close, too close to miss. His boot scraped the wood. Then a sharp metallic snap. The snare caught him clean around the ankle, yanking him backward with a shout. He fell hard into the rake trap, screaming as the tines drove into his thigh. 2 others rushed to help him, but Ellie remained still. They wouldn't risk more noise. Not yet. A few paces out, near the barn, a 4th man lit a cigar, cupping the flame with his hands. The match flared, and Ellie saw his face, scarred down the cheek, silver ring on his left ear. She recognized him from a wanted poster once nailed to the general store wall. A Blaine man. No doubt. She could have shot him, could have dropped him where he stood. But instead, she shifted her aim past him, farther out into the darkness where the leader waited. There, sitting still as a stone statue on a tall black gelding, was a man with a wide-brimmed hat and a long coat hanging like wings off his shoulders. He didn't speak, didn't move, just watched her house with deadpan stillness. Duke Blaine. Ellie's hand tightened on the rifle, but he didn't ride forward. He simply turned his horse, slow and deliberate, and disappeared back into the trees. The rest followed, melting into the night like smoke. Ellie didn't move until dawn broke over the canyon and the sky turned the color of old bruises. Only then did she lower the rifle, crawl back from the window, and descend the stairs in silence. Outside, blood dotted the earth where the snare had caught flesh. The rake lay bent and broken in the straw. But no bodies. They hadn't come for blood. Not yet. They were testing her. Next time, they wouldn't whisper. Next time, they'd come to kill. The sun had barely crowned the edge of Red Hollow when the riders came again. They rose out of the desert like phantoms, 8 of them this time, horses kicking up long shadows through the pink haze of dawn. They moved in a slow arc around the ranch, dust rising behind them like steam off hot iron. In the still morning air, Ellie could hear the saddle creaks, the soft snort of a stallion, the jingle of a spur. It was a funeral procession masquerading as a warning. She stood just beyond the porch steps, rifle resting in the crook of her arm, steady as a tombstone. Duke Blaine rode at the center, cocky and broad-shouldered, with a wolfish smile beneath his brim. His horse was dark and lean, the kind bred for raiding and running. A blood-red scarf hung loose around his throat. A silver pistol glinted at his hip, but his hands remained easy on the reins, like he thought the whole thing was already over. The rest of the gang fanned out, rifles drawn, eyes watchful. They didn't speak. Blaine guided his horse forward until it stood just 20 feet from her fence line. Then he pulled back the reins and leaned lazily over the horn, sizing her up like a cow about to be branded. "Mornin', Widow Ward," he called, voice smooth as river stone. "Heard you had a little fire in you. Had to come see for myself." Ellie didn't answer. Her eyes scanned the rest of the riders, counting, measuring. They were spread too wide for a clean sweep. She'd need to move fast, pick her moments. Blaine smiled wider. "You got grit, I'll give you that. Shooting at my boys in the dark, like some rattlesnake under a porch." A breeze stirred the hem of Ellie's duster. She said nothing. Blaine sat up straighter. "Here's the offer. You give up your land, your weapons, and whatever else you got stashed in that pretty house of yours, and maybe, just maybe, we let you walk. No sense in dying for dirt." Ellie raised the rifle and set it on the fence rail. Her voice came low, calm. "You've got one chance to turn around. After that, I bury you where you sit." The riders chuckled behind him. Blaine tilted his head, amused. "That's cute," he said. He nodded to his left. A man in a fringed coat lifted his rifle and fired a warning shot into the air. The sharp crack shattered the stillness. Ellie didn't flinch. She adjusted the sight. Then she pulled the trigger. The shot rang out like thunder. Duke Blaine's body snapped backward in the saddle, a fine red mist bursting from the center of his chest. His horse reared violently, then bolted. Blaine toppled sideways, hit the ground hard, and didn't move. Silence, pure, stunned silence. Then chaos. The gang erupted into screams and gunfire, bullets whining through the morning air, tearing through fence posts and shattering the barn side panel. Ellie ducked and rolled behind the feed trough as splinters rained down. Her second shot caught one rider in the neck, flinging him off his horse like a sack of grain. Another tried to flank her left, but the trap near the water barrel went off, an explosive roar that sent the man and his horse tumbling in smoke and dirt. Horses screamed. The air thickened with dust and acrid smoke. Gunfire cracked from every direction. Bullets punched into the porch rail, the walls, the oak tree to her right. Ellie sprinted for the front door, zigzagging through the churned earth, her breath coming hard now, shoulders tense with effort. A sharp pain seared through her left shoulder, something hot and fast. She stumbled inside, slamming the door shut behind her, breath ragged, heart hammering in her chest. A bullet had grazed her, just above the collarbone. The blood came fast, soaking the edge of her shirt. She leaned against the wall and hissed through her teeth. "Son of a bitch," she muttered, pressing a rag to the wound. Her fingers were already slick with crimson. Outside, the gunfire slowed, then ceased. The gang had pulled back behind the rocks at the far end of the property, their confidence shattered. She could hear them yelling, barking orders, dragging their wounded. The fight wasn't over, but the shock was in their eyes now. Fear was creeping in. She slumped into the corner of the kitchen, reaching for the tin of salt and a flask of whiskey. She poured both over the wound, nearly blacking out from the pain, biting down on the edge of her coat sleeve until the white-hot fire dulled to a low burn. In the quiet between gunshots, she felt something old inside her rise again, something she hadn't touched since Jonah died. The edge, the clarity, the fire that burned past grief and into steel. The part of her that had survived war and raiders and silence. It was back now, bright, sharp, merciless. She wrapped the wound in a strip of linen and stood, the room tilting for a moment before settling. Through the slats of the shutter, she caught movement. 2 men dragging Blaine's body toward the canyon rim. Even from this distance, she could see his head roll limp, his arms slack. He was dead. She'd seen enough death to know it by shape alone. She allowed herself a single breath of satisfaction. Then her jaw set. They would come again. Angry now. Less bold, but more desperate. And that made them even more dangerous. She reloaded the sharps, wiped the sweat from her brow, and slid back into the shadows of the parlor. Outside, the wind picked up, tugging at the flames flickering from the edge of the barn. Smoke curled toward the sky. The siege had begun, and she had only just started to fight. By dusk, the gunfire had faded into memory. The last thing Ellie saw from the attic window was the Blaine gang riding out in a crooked line, dragging Duke's lifeless body behind a sway-backed horse. His coat flapped like a torn banner in the wind, dust curling around the corpse like a burial shroud. The others didn't look back. They didn't fire another shot. Whatever they had come for, they hadn't expected to leave without their leader, and they'd paid dearly. Ellie stayed still long after they disappeared over the ridge, listening for hoofbeats that never returned. Only the wind remained, moaning through the canyon like a widow mourning her dead. The next morning, the land was hushed and hollowed, as if even the earth was stunned. Smoke still curled from the corner of the barn, and blood had dried in black trails across the porch steps and down into the dirt. Ellie moved quietly, methodically, burying one of the men near the fence line, the rest too broken to recognize. She didn't know their names, and didn't need to. By mid-morning, the sun had risen high and mean, baking the silence into every crevice of the ranch. She was sitting on the porch sharpening her knife, when she heard the distant beat of hooves, one rider this time. Steady, unhurried. Not a gang. Not a threat. Not yet. A tall man in a weathered duster and a black hat rode into view, his badge catching a glint of sunlight as he approached. His horse was lean and dust-caked. The man carried himself like someone who'd seen too much to flinch. U.S. Marshal. He reined in just outside the fence and nodded once, surveying the yard. Marshal Josiah Graves, he called, voice gravel-thick. I'm looking for Eleanor Ward. Ellie stood slowly, brushing dirt from her skirt. Her face betrayed nothing. You found her. He dismounted, eye scanning the bullet holes in the siding, the blood in the dust, the broken traps and charred wood. The stench of death still lingered like something wet and clinging. Hell of a thing happened here, he said, tying off his horse and stepping through the gate. Ellie motioned toward the porch. Coffee's hot. He followed her up the steps, boots heavy on the boards. She handed him a tin mug, still warm from the kettle on the stove. He sipped it slow, watching her over the rim. There was a long pause between them. Only the wind filled it. I was tracking the Blaine gang, he said finally. Followed their trail through dry well. Found 2 bodies outside Coulter's ranch. Heard they were heading this way. They did, Ellie said simply. His gaze wandered again, bullet holes, bloodstains, a broken saddle propped against the trough. Then it settled on her. You handle all this yourself. She met his eyes. Seemed no one else was gonna. Graves took another drink. How many? 8, I reckon. 1 limped off. Rest are buried. He let that settle. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. Held it up. Ellie didn't look. She already knew what was on it. Sketch of a face. Hat low, eyes sharp, mouth set. A name beneath it. Whisper. Wanted in 3 states. Last seen in 1866, near the banks of the Tennessee River. Accused of putting a bullet through a Confederate general at 700 yards. No witnesses, no arrest. Vanished like smoke at the war's end. Graves tilted the paper, comparing it to her face. You were a ghost story in the camps, he said. Whisper. The sniper who never missed. Some said you weren't even real. Ellie poured herself a cup, sat down in the rocker beside him. I was real, she said. Just got tired of men talking over my name. Graves was quiet for a long time, the kind of quiet born not from fear, but respect. Why'd you disappear? He asked finally. War ended, she said. Men like me didn't have a place anymore. So I made one. He nodded. then looked back out over the plain. A hawk circled far overhead, alone in the pale blue sky. "Folk want to know what happened here," he said. Ellie sipped her coffee. "Tell them Blaine and his men picked the wrong house." Graves stood, set the mug down on the porch rail. "You know I ought to bring you in." "You won't," she replied, without looking up. "No," he said, sliding the wanted poster back into his coat. "I won't." He walked down the steps, unhitched his horse, and swung up into the saddle. He paused once more before turning to go. "If anyone asks," he said, "I didn't see a damn thing out here. Just a quiet ranch and a stubborn widow with a good aim." Ellie nodded once. "That's all there is." He rode off without another word, dust rising behind him, folding back into the canyon trail like a page turning in a book. Ellie watched until he disappeared into the distance. Then she turned, stepped inside, and shut the door. They still speak of her, even now. In the town scattered along the canyon rim, where windblown children toss pebbles into dry creek beds and old ranchers sip whiskey beneath warped saloon awnings, the name, Widow Ward, lingers like a ghost sigh. They whisper it around campfires and tell the tale slow, careful, like it's something sacred. The story always starts the same way, with the morning Duke Blaine died, shot clean off his horse with a single bullet to the chest. Some say she was a marksman sent by God to right a wrong. Others claim she was no more than a witch with blood on her hands and a curse in her rifle. The stories twist with every retelling. Some have her riding with the Union Army. Others say she was Jonah Ward's ghost, wearing his boots and coat. A few swear she never spoke a word after the war, and that her eyes could turn a man to stone. But no one disputes what happened at Red Hollow. No one forgets how she stood alone on that porch, rifle steady, wind in her coat, and dropped the cruelest outlaw west of the divide with a shot, so true it cut through history. The rest of the gang fled like whipped dogs, dragging their dead and their pride behind them. They never came back, and neither did Trouble. Up on the ridge, far from the nearest trail, the ranch still stands. Time has weathered its bones, shingles worn thin, the barns slanted with age, fences buckled where the posts have sunk. But it breathes still, quiet and patient like the woman who walks its dusty paths. Ellie Ward tends her goats in the cool hours of morning. She hums to them sometimes, nothing with words, just sound, soft and wind-worn. Her hair is silver now, plaited into a long braid down her back. Her shoulders are thinner, her steps slower, but her hands remain steady, her eyes sharp. She speaks little. Visitors, when they come at all, keep their distance. Young men dare each other to ride close to the fence line, but none ever knock. Children leave bundles of dried flowers at the gate and run off giggling, glancing back as if they expect the door to open, the legend to appear. She never does. Only the goats hear her voice. Only the canyon hears her laughter, soft and rare, echoing briefly through the cottonwoods before vanishing into the vast, red silence. Sometimes, at dusk, she climbs the bluff behind the house and watches the land turn gold, and then purple, then black. The rifle no longer rests on her knees, but the memory of it does. She still sees the faces of the men she sent into the earth. Some haunt her, others do not. And on the rarest of nights, when the wind comes down from the north and the stars press close, a single voice returns to her like a forgotten melody, low, raspy, filled with the warmth of a man long gone. "Stay hidden if you must," he once whispered, his hand slick with blood, his eyes locked to hers. "But never let him take you." Those were Jonah's last words. She carried them like a commandment, carved them into the marrow of her bones. Through war, through grief, through fire and gunpowder and silence, through years where the only company was memory and the sharp crack of a loaded chamber. Somewhere beneath the floorboards, his coat still hangs, folded beside the box of bullets he never got to spend. His hat rests by the door, untouched since the morning she last wore it into town. But Ellie no longer wears ghosts. She wears peace. In the spring, wildflowers bloom in the corners of the property. She walks barefoot through them, her goats trailing behind like children. She plants corn in the small plot behind the smokehouse, though the soil fights her every inch. She doesn't mind. The work keeps her strong, keeps her anchored. And always, Red Hollow watches her, remembers her. The canyon cradles her secrets the way old lovers cradle scars. Down in the valley, they still tell her story. They say she never missed. They say she was the war come home in a woman's skin. They say she killed Blaine for revenge, or justice, or maybe just because the world needed someone who could still draw a line and mean it. But the truth is simpler than any tale they tell. She fought because no one else would, because what was hers was not theirs to take, because a promise made long ago in blood and dust had never been broken, not by war, not by death, not by fear. And so the gang never came back, because they met the deadliest secret Red Hollow ever kept.